Hello, hello, hello. Um, hello. Yeah, I'm here again. So, what I wanted to do, which is also why the title is why I play Yuriko. Yeah. So, this is the deck I'm known for, mostly in Germany, but also like on the Yuriko Discord. I had some pretty decent results, probably one of the best results you can have with this commander. And that's not that much of an achievement because this commander has really terrible results usually. And I basically didn't want to work that much today, so I decided to just spend the time goldfishing and playing some Yuriko. Lost to a stupid time on all the other games. So yeah, I want to make this as usual more as a version for my future self to reference for tournaments instead of a real guide, but I share them in case some people find something useful, taking the risk that some of these German grinders actually watch this and maybe have a better idea how to play against this. Oh well, so why do you want to play this commander? And I get this question asked a lot because it's generally the consensus that it's pretty bad commander, what most people think at least. And I would consider myself somewhat of a strong player. So why do I still play this commander? And couldn't I have so much better results if I would just play a blue farm or something? And I don't think so, and I will outline the reasons why I don't think that necessarily. Because I would consider myself more of a deck builder than a deck player. Usually, especially when I played 60 cards, the power of my deck was often, except when I played Modern, where I had like a pet deck, but most of the time the power of my decks was much greater than the skill of my players. That I would just like punt a lot, but I had the best deck in the format most of the time, so it didn't really matter. And so I obviously tried to apply the skill to cEDH and try to build a very good cEDH deck that fits my skills. And I just couldn't replicate what Yuriko has to offer. So that's why I still keep playing her. And I sometimes think about switching to a different style, but then I don't have a lot of time and play like one or two tournaments or three in a year. So that's why I keep sticking with this. But if there was a command that was similar in the strengths that Yuriko had to offer, I maybe would play it, but it isn't. So that's why I will stop talking so much and explain, or talk more, but now explain what this is, what Yuriko offers. I will make this more for very good players because who know like most of these cards, and for Yuriko players. So I will not explain what Yuriko does and stuff, and just explain the very high level concepts. Because also these high level concepts are what I thrive in, because when you don't get to play as much, you will miss some of this low level stuff. I lost a game the other day because I forgot what commander text is, but you still can gain this advantage from understanding the high level concepts. And before I lose these, I will make a video where I note all the high level concepts you have with playing this deck so I can keep using them to beat up my opponents. So basically, what Yuriko has to offer is a lot of things in the sense that it plays a lot of very different angles. If you look at a deck like Rockrex Hylas, what it basically offers is speed, and it also offers a bit of blue, so maybe it's not a good example. Let's look at deck at Quick. Quick technically has the creature combo, but basically what Quick does, it wins fast. It just like Godo. It doesn't have any other very good angle. It just tries to win the game, and that's why Quick and Godo, sorry Annie, are not like the best decks in the format because it has a very predictable angle. And while it is very good at that angle, it doesn't have other angles. And another deck like that would be a Stax deck like Elivia or Tyam. Those are very good at dawdling and slowing the game down and grinding. And I just lost to a Tiam after interacting a bunch, but at some point they're unstoppable. But they are not very good at presenting fast wins or interacting with the table. So that Tiam player got farmed by me, like winning early 3 times in a row. And Yuriko is just like many of the best decks, like Kinnan or Blue Farm, but I would even argue even a bit more than these best decks. Yuriko is somewhat of a jack of all trades deck. And that's also something that makes it very hard to play, because when you play a cEDH game with Yuriko, you don't quite know which type of game you're getting. So you have to be somewhat good at all of these games. So let's start with the boring stuff first, where Yuriko kind of imitates some Grixis deck like Blue Farm or Roxai, or I'd say more like Blue Farm, in a way where it still nets you a lot of win playing to these strengths. And Yuriko, as many Germans know it probably, because that's what it's most notorious for, is also sometimes a very control deck that locks you out and then you play 17 turns and only the Yuriko player has fun. But it can also, other than a deck like Elivir that does only that, Yuriko has other angles to the game. So what these angles are, obviously the most important one is Thassa's Oracle combos. And the obvious one with Thassa's Oracle Tainted Pact, but one actually not a lot of Yuriko players are on, which I also think is a great mistake. Where the hell, in which tag did I put? I mean, all the good players know what Thassa's Oracle does. But also Doomsday. And this package of like Thassa's Oracle, Doomsday, Tainted Pact, the good tutors, Dark Ritual, and the other combo, which is Opposition Agent Scheming Symmetry, it allows you to have games where you can present wins relatively quickly and also present wins when you have card advantage, which is what a lot of the stacks lack. So one of these strengths is that it can still imitate some of these, I'd call them Blue Farm strengths, where it just can durdle and then you slam a Doomsday or Thorkel with a couple pieces of backup because it's also blue. And that can be enough to win the game. And that angle is also very dangerous, because some of the Yuriko-specific cards like Mausoleum Wanderer and Flare of Denial and Fierce Guardianship, which is not Yuriko-specific but it's more on a Yuriko, and Dorothy Voidwalker actually can support this game plan very well, that sometimes when your opponents are not prepared or you're in the classic blue pot with 5 Italis, then you can also win fast. So that is one of the angles. The other angle is, of course, one that's very tournament specific, but it's the restart angle, that Yuriko runs a lot of interaction. Not as much as some other decks, perhaps some Blue Farm deck runs more, but it runs more versatile interaction. So it runs a lot of the free interaction here, 9 removal spells, which is on the low end for a normal Yuriko deck. Some stacks pieces, but I will talk about this later. The Thoughtseize that I just added, and 11 counter spells. And something like Mausoleum Wanderer is also something I would count to this. And the recently cut Hope of Gripper maybe 2, or Dorothy Voidwalker maybe 2. And what this does is that you can not lose to the turbo decks in the very early game because you have these. And that is a great advantage that other decks such as Italy or Dagotimna, they don't have that they will lose more of a percentage to a very fast deck because they themselves are fast. But Dagotimna is like kind of the exemplification of this problem because it's a slower deck that doesn't have interaction, or maybe Tiam too. And Yuriko also has that over the other decks, that it can interact. And actually, Yuriko is one of the very good decks to interact because of the main strength of what this commander does. Many think of it like, well, it's a combat win con, it's burn, but I don't know how many percentage of games I win with burn. It's maybe like 10%. Like, the most important thing about Yuriko is that she costs 2 mana and that it's very easy to have a hand with an enabler. So you have 12 enablers. I added this one recently. And you also, like, you can say that like a Chromox or Mox Diamond or Lotus Petal are an enabler. because you have working card advantage game plan by turn 2 that keeps you in the game. And that means that you also can mulligan for other things. So people always say mulligan for interaction and turbo plot, but reality, once you get to know more about the game, you know that you need to have interaction and a plan. And when you play a deck like Rock Thirst or Blue Farm, getting a plan is hard. You need to actually have mana, fast mana most of the time, and the payoff, because Tymna is not very good in the Blue Farm deck as a payoff, which is another reason I will get to later. But Yuriko can mulligan more aggressively for the interaction. And to demonstrate that, let's just like look whether these hands have a plan. So this hand has a plan, it has a misdirection, and it has a fish. So the fish would be a plan against turbo even. So let's look at another hand. This one has no lands, so let's mulligan it. This hand, you could already say has a plan. So you can go Otterera, Chromog, Gitaxian, Probe, Thassa's Oracle, and then you probably find a black land. If you don't, you still can Lotus Petal into Yuriko. So if some of these other cards were good for the pot, if it was like a Mindbreak trap for Natalie, you could consider keeping it. So next hand, this hand has a plan, 2 lands and Enabler. So if, for example, this Contagion is really good because you're playing against 2 Magdas, then this hand is also very good because just like these 3 cards make the plan, the other ones can be kept if it's pot specific. This hand has a plan with a fish, of course. This hand does not have a plan. This one sucks, so mulligan. This one does not have a plan. This one does not have a plan. This one does not have a plan. Damn it, so much for my demonstration. This one does not. This one you can say has a plan again, so if it has like a very good hand. But okay, I'm getting a bit unlucky perhaps even. This one has a plan. This one doesn't. This one doesn't. This one doesn't. Oh, this one has like a sketchy plan with a Fairy Sea and a Ventrue, so maybe it's keepable. This one doesn't. This one doesn't. This one. Huh. So one thing could be to re-record the video, but I think from the experience I have from goldfishing this deck, usually this deck has a lot more hands that have a plan than other decks, which makes sense because for other decks you need a lot more interlocking pieces to make a plan, while Yuriko, one of the plans is just one of these 12 creatures and 2 lands, and it's hard to miss on that. And then there's a lot of other plans where you can place Dex pieces into turn 3 Yuriko and stuff. So one of these strengths is that you can actually have more consistent mulligans, not in the sense that you always get a keepable hand, because I'd say also Blue Farm and the Rock side, they can mulligan low and have a plan, but usually that plan can not always be decided on the pot then. So you see a lot of Blue Farms mulliganing to 4 for their turn heuristic study, and then getting absolutely clowned on by some Dargetimner player that kills them. Or you have a turbo player that mulligans to 3 for their turn into Necro, but they don't have the pivot of going into something else. So that I'd say is the main strength of Yuriko, but because it enables all these other plans. I maybe in a bad order started with these other plans, but Yuriko ties the whole room together by being able to mulligan more aggressively, because you know you usually have a plan even in the lower hands, and can mulligan according to the pot. This, of course, also makes it, again, very hard deck, because you need to know what the pot is doing to know which cards to keep, and all of the cards are very specifically good. So, for example, Submerge is really, really good against a deck like an Italy or a Tyam, but it's really bad against a deck like a Roxai, while a card like Fourth Witch Prowler destroys the green decks. Wait, where is it? Fourth Witch Prowler or Orcish Bowmasters, they destroy the green decks, but they're very bad against the Grixis deck. And then you have cards like Opposition Agent or my favorite, Nullrod, which is good against sometimes the green decks, especially Opposition Agent, but it's especially good against Roxai. Like, I don't remember the last time where I played a Nullrod and the Roxai has attempted a win before like turn 7 or something, or attempted but never got there. So you need to know these pot-specific things in order to play this deck well, which is why it's definitely not a good beginner deck, which many people say. Okay, so this is hopefully somewhat of a smooth transition into the other angle of Yuriko, which is the more notorious one because you see people getting Thou killed early in every tournament from every deck, but the angle that you see from Yuriko is quite unique, and I'd say is like also the times I get most recounted of when they had a game with me and I played this angle, which is the so-called Swiss angle. I call it this way because in Germany you have this, and I think also in parts of Europe you have this notion that in the Swiss some players randomly remove your stuff and then you lose because someone else just wins. So that's what the Germans and other people call getting Swissed. And Yuriko sometimes, in quotes, randomly removes your stuff, but actually because it has a plan behind that and it's very successful doing it. So one of the features of having very few cards needed for the plan is that you can interact disproportionately early with your opponents. So how do I give an example? A lot of decks and a lot of cEDH is basically played that everyone develops a lot of value, like card advantage, mana advantage, and everyone sandbags their interaction because if you interact with the other person, two other players get ahead. So you sandbag till the last moment and then someone wins, and then is what you see, these crazy 3-hour games, instant speed fight styles, which you see them in your games. I don't see them that much in my games, but that's what happens. What Yuriko can do, because of some of these cards, is they can interact earlier. So maybe your plan to get a lot of value and then win a Born fight later in the game is to cast an Esper Sentinel. And Yuriko then can use cards like Fourth Bridge Prowler to stop that. Or in another game, I had a Rock side play a Mana Vault, and then I casted a Harrier Strix and tapped the Mana Vault. And in 1v1, those tempo plays are very common because you're in 1v1. So beating one player is the goal. So you want to do something what hurts them at the maximum time, with the maximum damage, so you can win the game. While in cEDH, it's not so obvious that it works because you have 3 opponents. So it's very contextual to do it. But the advantage of cEDH is that in 60 cards, the decks are built to be resilient. So an aggro deck has a plan for getting their turn 1 creature removed. While in cEDH, the decks are not built in a way which have a plan to get something interacted with early. That's why you see cEDH player mulliganing very low, because in 60 card, mulliganing very low is often not very good because then someone casts a Thoughtseize on you and then you're out of the game. So you, on the one hand, get the issue that you have more opponents to deal with. On the other hand, these opponents are very easy to deal with. And usually you can set them back a couple turns, or at least like one turn with one piece of interaction. So this is the other angle of Yuriko. And I think I will spend some of the next time talking about some of the details, because this is the angle that's most unique to Yuriko. So, for example, Kinnan has a lot of these I keep only a hand with interaction and try to force a restart, while like a lot of Grixis decks have these I will go for Thorkel and jam. And Yuriko is unique in the way that it can Swiss people like this. So, Swissing people and then winning the game is very difficult. And it's because when you play a card that kills one of their creatures like Flare of Malice, and you manage to do it to 3 opponents, so that 3 opponents are very set back, then the good opponents, which I assume your opponents are good, the good opponents will band together and try to win against you, like make it a draw and win against you. And it becomes a 3v1 very quickly, and it also becomes a 3v1 over multiple turns, because usually you try to win the turn, you become the threat in cEDH, but in Yuriko, that's not the case. In Yuriko, it's often the case that by turn 2, you have set back people so much that they band against you. One of the most common examples, which for example happened in my finals game in one of the tournaments, is that I played a turn 2 null rod and two players could not do anything against it, and where one of them was stuck on one land and the other one was stuck on an ancient tomb. And then it is turn 2, I played like one other creature, and already the three people are banding up against you and they won't use their counters on each other and they try to kill your stuff and so on. So you have to navigate around that. One way to navigate around that is by making the moment of Swissing, choosing it very deliberately, and that requires a lot of deck knowledge and skill. So the earlier you blow them out, the earlier you will become the threat, because if all of your opponents are blown out, obviously you are the threat. But the later you blow people out, the harder it gets. So if you look at a common play pattern, it's usually turn touristic into draw a couple cards, into then like mana, and then maybe another value engine. So if you counter the turn touristic or play a steel enchantment on it, usually their plan is very bad. Their plan may be following up with a Tymna or something, but usually that was their plan. While once you let them have heuristic, they will accrue a lot of value, and as you know from 60 cards, when you play it, like people with a lot of value are harder to blow out because they have more things to do. So one of the hard things to play this deck is actually balancing. When you blow your opponents out, you shouldn't do it too early and you shouldn't do it too late. I'm generally, I think, someone who does it too early, and I still play this deck because I don't think I ever played a game where I didn't make a mistake, except if there's like a very early win. Because of this very tight balance between blowing someone out early and blowing someone out late. So this is all, I suppose, very meta stuff still. So I need to think if I want to get into the details right now. I think one more meta stuff is that Yuriko lends itself still to being in the 3v1. The famous commander ninjutsu is that you don't have a commander text. So even if your opponents band up against you, usually they cannot get your commander off the board because they need to kill everyone's of your little creatures, and in the late game all of your ninjas also count as those little creatures, which keep getting back to ninjutsu and Yuriko. And some people manage that, but then I can still hardcast Yuriko for 3, and then probably also at some point for 5. So usually beating the Yuriko deck by not having had access to the commander, which is a very common strategy against something like Tayam or Elivir, usually just does not work. There's usually not enough removal at the table. And then then usually they try to kill your other stuff and may succeed at that if they have a lot of removal. But still, you have a lot of creatures, so they don't succeed often. And then you still draw 2 cards a turn while they draw a combined of 3. Now, that may sound bad, which are bad odds, but there's 2 things where these arguments like, wow, your opponents outdraw you in a 3v1, how can you win? 2 things kind of counterpoint to that. So the first thing that counterpoints to that is that the Yuriko deck very intentionally is built with a lot of cards that in these low resource fights have a lot of value, while other decks are not necessarily. Here it's important to understand this difference between synergy and good cards. And usually a deck like Yuriko, which is in quotes Ninja Tribal, is more thought of as a synergy deck than another deck like Blue Farm, which is generally thought of as all good cards. But this synergy versus good cards deck is in a very generalized sense because cEDH has a lot of high resource games. So a better way to explain that, wait, let me see if the OBS is running. great stuff, is that in Blue Farm you play a card like Final Fortune. Final Fortune does nothing on its own. It does nothing with Tymna, and it only is good when you actually play a Final Fortune and then can win afterwards. So why is Blue Farm called an all good cards deck? Because what usually happens is that you have a lot of these good cards that synergize together still. And obviously Blue Farm still deserves its name as a good card deck because it runs a lot of standalone powerful cards. And another deck like Rock Thrash, or maybe Rock Thrash is a pretty good example, that the cards actually have synergy, that a standalone card in Rock Thrash is much worse than a standalone card in Blue Farm, and moreover, that a standalone, like 3 random cards in Rock Thrash are worse than 3 random cards in Blue Farm. I'd say that 3 random cards can usually produce a win in Blue Farm, while 3 random cards in Rock Thrash could be something like Cradle and stuff, but also it could be something like Candelabra, Magus of the Candelabra, Thundertrap Trainer, and then those 3 cards are really bad if you don't have the synergy. And in Yuriko, all these cards synergize with the commander, obviously, but you could still see them as a lens of standalone cards, because Yuriko, as we said, is basically should be a constant in the game, if not something dumb happens like Blood Moon, that cards synergizing with Yuriko are basically equivalent to being standalone good, because Yuriko is very often on the battlefield and usually does not leave the battlefield for 1 turn or more. There are cards like Gilded Drake, but we have a lot of removal and no one plays Gilded Drake anymore, and so on, and it's just very hard to get Yuriko off the board. So in that sense, you could say against this 3 versus 2 argument that if you're in a low enough resource game, that then the opponent's cards actually don't synergize as well together. Like, imagine a Blue Farm has like an Underworld Breach and a Dark Ritual. They still need something extra to make it happen. And when you pick random cards off the deck, maybe even mana, and then something that goes in the slot of Underworld Breach, like a Moon Circuit Hacker, then you actually are winning the race. Or maybe a better example would be a combo piece, like a Doomsday or something. A Doomsday still is better alone because Yuriko is a constant, while Underworld Breach is the more powerful win con because it has more mana and it's easier to protect. And something like Grand Abolisher is a better effect to get a win through than like a counterspell, but a counterspell on the other hand, then again, is very good in the low resource games because the Grand Abolisher without a win to follow up does exactly nothing except that it eats a removal spell from an opponent who is scared of the Abolisher, of course. So that's the first point against, that you get outdrawn if all of your other ninjas are killed. The second point is, of course, that usually no one plays that much removal that all your ninjas are killed and all your card advantage is gone, and the deck just has a lot of card advantage in general. Then I won't even go into detail of stuff like the MDFCs that also can be counted as card advantage, and how the free spells don't need something to pitch and you can hardcast them later. But the second thing is that it's still a game of chance. So even if the odds are stacked against you, that it's a 1v3 with you drawing 2 cards a turn, your opponent is drawing 3 cards, if you only gain your 40% win percentage from that, then that's totally okay, because it's a game of chance and we don't expect to win 50% of the games if your opponents are the same player strength as you. Of course, if your opponents are better than are worse than you, you expect something around like a 50% win rate. At least this is what I track if I play against people who are not very competitive in tournaments. And so then obviously the skill gap is a difference. Another thing about the skill gap is, of course, that Yuriko allows you to play a lot of turns, so you can showcase the skill gap. This is a classic phenomenon with 60 card, that if a control deck is good, you see the very good players try to play the control deck because in average they get more turns, and then on average they get to outplay your opponent. While if you play Italy, you can be the best Italy player in the world, and some of them are very good and politic very well, but you still have less agency than with a Yuriko or a Kinnan, where you actually can have more turns to outplay your opponents. Okay, so this was a long rant on that you are in these 1v3s when you get Swissed as another general sense. I think the last thing I hope I want to say about this is also that you have this advantage that if you are in a pot with some bad players and some good players, Yuriko allows you to target the good players a little bit more aggressively and trust that the bad players will make mistakes. And bad is, in one sense, something of skill, that like if your one opponent is very skilled, then you can kill their Kinnan maybe more than you would kill a Kinnan with some normal person. And then the good person does not have as much of a chance of outplaying you because you just twist them really hard. And the bad players you can then outplay, basically. So, and then the good players will talk a lot and try to make the bad players make correct plays. But usually the bad players have some hidden information which they don't share with the good player. And then you still gain percentage points that you can leech from the bad players, while the good player that is better than you cannot leech that many percentage points from you because they have less agency. Okay, so this was all very general, and I think keeping this very general is also somewhat good because it shows that it's not something specific about Yuriko. It's something about that I, as someone who comes from 60 cards and has these feelings for these tempo mechanics, want to play a deck that plays in every axis of the format, because then it also doesn't get boring. So a deck that wins, that can interact with other people, and that also has a way of Swissing other people. Okay. Actually, I may... I want to say one more thing, which is a very me-specific reason why I play this deck, but it's a complete thing, and if I'm at some point down, why should I play Yuriko and think of signing up with Blue Farm to some tournament, then it's important for me to have this reason, is that the games you get with Yuriko when you Swiss opponents are unlike very other cEDH games. So if I play against Unrivaled in a Born Upon the Wind Crazy Ristic fight, then Unrivaled will, also he lied to me that game, but he will have a lot more experience and will more likely outplay me because people practice that. And that's also one of the dangers you get into when you play Blue Farm as your first deck, that you get in these game states which a lot of people have that are good have seen a lot of times, and they will outplay you. Like I know a friend of mine who's also a Yuriko player, played a Grixis deck and got into a Bound fight and got outplayed by another Blue Farm player who was more in these situations. And one of the advantages of these slow crawly games with Yuriko is that opponents will just not have as much experience as you. So I don't play a lot. I play very little for a cEDH player standards, I'd say. But still, whenever I come back, I found that people have gotten a lot better that I know have gotten a lot better in sense of tournament standings and of technique, but they still make a lot of errors when playing against Yuriko, because it's just very hard to play against it, and there's basically no other practice partner except me. So this is this brewer's advantage kind of thing, that if you're the only person to play a deck well, or at least have some results with it and play these good opponents in the later rounds of Swiss, then you have this brewer's advantage, not only that your opponent doesn't know what the deck does, which a lot of good people know what a lot of fringe commanders do, and can kind of map this accordingly. So you can say whatever. Okay, this random, is it Spellslinger commander, Vadrik or something, is much like Vivian, that you just have to kill it a couple times and then they usually don't do anything and you have to be careful of letting them get away with casting big spells. And Yuriko, and especially these Swiss board state where you are very slow, it's a board state that is very hard to replicate. So that's another general thing why it's good to have such a deck, especially if you don't play that well. So I'm going to take a break. Can I pause this recording? Not very good at OBS. And then I will talk about more stuff with more detailed things.